New Orleans, Louisiana, home of Mardi Gras, the French Quarter, and the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. Also home to one of the most corrupt police departments in the United States of America.
No police department in America had a more richly deserved reputation for incompetence, corruption, and brutality than the New Orleans Police Department.
The killing that tied last year's record took place for dawn. Police say a 37-year-old New Orleans man stopped to use a payphone. He was approached by two men who apparently tried to rob him. One of the men shot the victim twice. He died later during surgery.
In the early 90s, crime soared in New Orleans on the streets and inside the police department. Tourism plunged, property values plummeted. Finally, 3 years ago, the town's leading citizens decided enough was enough.
For years, the New Orleans Police Department has labored under a long shadow of misconduct, investigations, charges, and criminal convictions. Now the city has agreed to major reforms.
The three policemen plus a former officer could face the death penalty.
The New Orleans Police Department is still answering for claims of unwarranted killings and allegations of corruption.
Also new at noon, and New Orleans police are now under investigation.
12:56, we are following some breaking news right now within the New Orleans Police Department. The department's Public Integrity Bureau has reassigned two officers. We're told that Sergeant Dylan Payson and Officer Brittany Kimbrough have both been reassigned for violations of NOPD policy.
An investigation is underway on 5 NOPD officers looking into alleged misconduct.
Like Slim said, if you're off the porch in the mid to early 90s and still alive, you're a gangster for sure. The Hustlers and Steppers weren't the only gangsters in New Orleans during this time period. In the 90s, the NOPD's nickname would be Gangsters with Badges. Two dirty cops that were infamous for planting evidence on street dudes were Blue Eyes and Curly Head.
For the second time in less than a month, video showed police officers allegedly planting evidence. Newly released body camera footage apparently shows officers placing drugs in a car. The alleged incident happened during an arrest in November. Officers were searching the car after witnessing what they said looked like a drug deal.
Blue Eyes and Curly Head would also pull off jack moves. If you were a D-boy pumping on one set, they would hack you up for your bread and hack you up for your work, then slide it to whoever they were in cahoots with on another set.
Officer is accused of trying to help the very people supposed to be busting by working with drug dealers to steal money from other dealers during staged traffic stops.
In the early 90s, the NOPD would be more cutthroat than the Steppers and the Hustlers that were in the streets of New Orleans.
In the early 90s, crime soared in New Orleans on the streets and inside the police department. Tourism plunged, property values plummeted. Finally, 3 years ago, the town's leading citizens decided enough was enough.
Sarge would lead this band of 30 cops. Ask anyone from the streets of the NO, they will tell you that these crooked cops were always outside of their jurisdictions, harassing anyone they believed to be hustling. Another dirty cop that was about that foolishness was Melvin Williams, known as Flat Top on the streets. Williams, too, will be known for pulling off acts and doing all kind of crooked shit in the mean streets of New Orleans. Flat Top was a longtime NOPD veteran that was highly respected by his brotherhood of dirty cops. In 2005, Melvin Flat Top Williams would go too far as he and his rookie partner would do the unthinkable. In 2005, Melvin Williams and his rookie partner, Dean Moore, will be charged with the beating death of Raymond Robert. Flat Top and Moore were locked up since their convictions. Melvin Williams, who was 50 years old at the time, would be recognized by his nickname, Flat Top. The rookie Moore, who was 38 at the time, was merely 77 days out of the academy. On July 30th, 2005, the two were traveling through Treme, working an overtime shift under a community policy grant when they encountered Robert. Moore would restrain Robert while Flat Top would beat him to a bloody pulp, later passing from his injuries.
begin with a New Orleans police officer accused of beating a man to death before Hurricane Katrina, who took the stand today in his own defense. Let's go now to WDSU News reporter Gina Swanson, who's on your side live from federal court. Gina, tell us about the testimony, his testimony today.
That's right, Camille. Actually, we should mention that court proceedings just broke for the day in the case of those two officers accused of beating a man to death. This morning, in his own behalf, another took the stand this afternoon. But first up was rookie cop Matthew Dean Moore. He says that anyone that said that he or his training officer Melvin Williams kicked, punched, or beat Raymond Robert is lying. He also said in testimony today that this case has cost him a lot personally and professionally. He said on the stand that no use of force was involved in the case. He says it wasn't even necessary. But his story didn't hold up as well under cross-examination. He did appear to stumble when prosecutors pressed him about inconsistencies in testimony that he'd given to the FBI and the grand jury just about all the events leading up to Raymond Robert being brought to the hospital. Now, also on the stand today, veteran officer Melvin Williams took the stand. He also said that no use of force was necessary in this case with Raymond Robert. He says that he just assisted Officer Matthew Moore with getting Robert into custody. He also says that when they realized he was hurt, they brought him to the hospital, which is the proper protocol. He did admit from the stand that if a false report had been filed in this case, that would be illegal. He says if use of force had been deployed in this case, that they would have had to report it. None of those things. Story that he has never hit or struck Raymond Robert in this case that just wrapped up this afternoon. They were expecting to continue testimony, but one of the expert witnesses actually was prepared to fly into town tomorrow, wasn't available this afternoon, so they just decided to break for the day. But that's the very latest from federal court. I'm Gina Swanson.
Well, back to today's other big story, the case of two New Orleans police officers now convicted of beating a man back in 2005 and the cover-up. WDSU News reporter Gina Swanson has been covering the trial since the very beginning. She's on your side at federal court with reaction.
The jury spent just about an hour deliberating this morning before they came back with a guilty verdict. The officers, Melvin Williams and Matthew Dean Moore, guilty as charged on all counts. On count one, did Officer Williams violate the civil rights of Raymond Robert by kicking and beating him? The jury said guilty. Did those injuries result in the death of Raymond Robert? The jury said yes. On count two, the charge of obstruction, did Officer Williams and Officer Moore file a false police report about the incident? The jury said guilty. And on count three, lying to federal agents, the jury found Officer Moore guilty on those charges. Certainly this has been an emotional 6 years for the Robert family, but they say they never lost faith that this day would come.